In a surprise to no one, economic stimulus negotiations between Nancy Pelosi and Steve Mnuchin are still at a standstill. 7 Democrats blocked a new economic relief deal yesterday they believe was too slimmed down from the President Trump's $2 trillion demand.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell tried to advance a $500 billion bill on the floor of the Senate, but like last month, Democrats blocked that skinny version. White House economics reporter for The Washington Post, Jeffrey Stein, is here to weigh in on what exactly is happening. Great to see you, Jeff.
Good to see you, Jeff.
Thanks for having me back.
First, before we get to the stimulus negotiations, was wondering if you could react to the unemployment claims numbers that we saw this morning. I guess they were good by whatever standard we're using now. They dropped some from last week. This is new people filing for unemployment. We can throw this graphic up on the screen. So weekly jobless claims slumped to the lowest level since the pandemic started in March, down to 787,000 new claims, which is still, I should say, an astonishingly large amount, but better, Jeff, than what we saw last week.
Yeah, some modest signs of progress maybe, but at this point we've seen such a huge increase in the number of permanently unemployed that those numbers are really cold comfort. We're already seeing excesses of the levels from the Great Recession of people permanently falling out of the labor force. And this number, I mean, it's one that really the initial unemployment claims that we saw when this started were unlike anything we've ever seen. I mean, it was greater. I think the initial weekly claims at the beginning of this crisis were greater than for several months at the beginning of the recession. And we were expecting it to come down months ago. And yes, it's good that we're not seeing 1 million new jobless claims every week anymore, but it's still staggeringly high. And, that permanent scarring in the economy has not really shown signs of abating. If anything, the number of permanently out of work Americans is only going up. And that's, probably the scariest thing because, you have people who fall out of the labor market all the time and you see the churn. But if those people can find new work, that's one thing. But the economists I talked to are really scared by that other indicator and say that that's the one that requires urgent action on.
Yeah, I mean, we've tracked that very closely here, Jeff. So outside of that, what is going on with the stimulus? Every day I hear Nancy Pelosi and Steve Mnuchin are talking and that we're getting closer and closer and closer. But I mean, none of the actual indicators seem to say that. So lay it out for us. What are the chances that you see that we could have a stimulus before the election?
Well, so just to get everyone up to speed, a couple days ago, as news of a potential agreement builded, Mitch McConnell, we reported, went and told Republican lawmakers at a closed-door lunch on Capitol Hill that he had advised the White House not to put a bill up before the election, that it would interfere with Amy Coney Barrett's Supreme Court proceedings, and that it would require Republicans to stay in D.C. when they could otherwise be out campaigning, and that it would split the caucus at a time where it's important for Republicans to be unified heading into the election. I think that calculus is not necessarily going to hold. I was talking to a Republican strategist who's in close contact with a lot of House Republicans, and he was making the point that, so this is like the main tension we're seeing right now, and the one that's been playing out is, to what extent can Trump sort of bend the Republican caucus into supporting something that they are squeamish about? And I think if you were to say like a year ago, 2 years ago, even 6 months ago, like the answer would be very convincing that, when Trump says jump,
right,
the Republican senators say how high. But now we're at a point where it seems like there are a number of Republican senators who are actually not really willing to go along with that. Some of them might be looking towards the aftermath of a Donald Trump defeat. His poll, Trump's polls look pretty bad. And so the big question is, how many Republicans will go along? So this is a long-winded way of saying, if Pelosi and Mnuchin get an agreement and Trump gets behind it, how many House Republicans go along? Because if a ton of House Republicans go along, Mitch McConnell may have to back off of his aversion to putting this on the floor before the election. And I've heard some estimates that there are many as 60, 70 House Republicans who will just go along with whatever Trump is fully enthusiastically endorsing. And if that's the case, then, maybe there's like an outside flush, whatever the poker term, I don't know, a chance of this getting done in time.
We don't know either, Jeff.
Not a lot of cards being played right now, but
Yeah.
I think better than 5%. I don't know. I don't know how helpful it is to handicap these things, but I think Pelosi may see McConnell's aversion to this and see an opportunity to split the caucus. And another huge factor that's giving me a bit of optimism maybe is that we are at the point at which those crucial stimulus checks, which to me may be what this whole thing is about in a lot of ways, even if they reached a deal tomorrow, which is faster than they could, I don't think the stimulus checks could reach most people until after the election.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Is that in the back of some Democrats' heads saying, at a minimum, this won't arrive until after it's, the most cynical Democrats have probably been looking at this and saying, and some I've talked to have said, why are we going to let Trump send 80 million people a check with his name on it? And now we're at the point where that might not actually be a live factor. Of course, the flip side of that is does Trump still care as much about a deal now? And actually, we saw Trump tweeting yesterday, I don't really care about a deal. Democrats are getting in the way of it, blah, 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 blah. So, as that pendulum switches towards maybe there's not as much upside for Trump to sign a deal, maybe the urgency of Trump to get a deal kind of decreases a little bit. But that's a little speculative too.
Yeah.
There's a golden window when it perfectly balances Pelosi's cynical ploy of the checks won't be there before the election, but Trump still thinks it could move the polls. Maybe there's 30-minute time span when they could get this done.
I was talking to a lobbyist who was saying it's right now it's a neutron for Pelosi, and she needs to send it and have it be turned into a proton by the time it gets there.
Yes, that's exactly how I was thinking about this. Let me ask you a little bit about the Senate Republican piece, because there's some parts of this that I don't fully understand. So one is, would McConnell bring this to the floor if he expected the majority of his caucus to vote against it? And two is, some of them have been out there, and I think maybe even McConnell, you can tell me who all has said this, but there have been a number of Senate Republicans out there it would be a political liability for us to spend this money right now. Do they actually believe that? Maybe you can't answer that, but do they actually think that, or is that just a made-up excuse?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. I mean, it's hard to handicap the numbers, but let's say there's 40, or let's say there's 51 Senate Republicans. I think there are a solid 20 who are came up through the Tea Party, Freedom Caucus aligned. I mean, obviously Freedom Caucus is a House phenomenon, but genuinely I really feel morally personally uncomfortable and unwilling to go with that number. Progressives would say they were willing to help when the stock market took a hit, but now that millions of unemployed people need help, they're not willing to open the pocketbook. That's what the criticism would be. But I really think that is a solid 20. And then I think there's at least 15 who I think really are interested in doing something north of $1 trillion, especially the Republicans who are up in vulnerable swing states, Cory Gardner, Susan Collins, even Cornyn in Texas seems very on board with a big stimulus package. I think there's a little bit of a phenomenon going around now where the arch conservatives who are opposed to any more spending are the most vocal ones, and we hear from them more. But this morning, Marco Rubio was on CNBC, and they asked him, what do you think about a stimulus package? And he was he basically suggested that even 1.82 trillion, he doesn't love it, but he's going to go along. And Rubio is not the most conservative member of the Republican caucus, but he's also not he's not Collins or Romney or Gardner. He's in the center right, I would think, of the Republican caucus. And the fact that he's let's do this publicly, not even doing the whole we have to worry so much about blue state bailouts and going on and on about that, that made me feel there's probably at least 15, 20 Republicans who go along with it. That's not a majority, but I think that's enough.
Didn't Romney say he was opposed to it, though?
Oh, maybe I'm wrong about Romney, but I just I think of Romney in general as generally on the lefter part of the caucus, but maybe that's actually wrong.
It's complicated. It's complicated trying to.
I guess on
work that
economic
access.
matters, he's
That's
more
right.
conservative.
That's probably where you would put it.
Yeah.
Jeff, we appreciate the update. Very sad. We hope that golden window does happen
We'll be praying for that.
people, and appreciate you joining us, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks
Good to see
again.
you.
Love being on this program. Thanks, guys.
Always.
Next on Rising, journalist Matt Taibbi, he points out the difference in reporting on the Steele dossier versus the Hunter Biden debacle. That's when Rising continues.